Halo Infinite's theater mode is ruining Halo. Yes, really. Well, sort of. I'm MrBamble, and this is my channel.
Hey, I didn't know you made house calls for him. You know our motto, we deliver.
Now, I know what you might be thinking. How is a mode that I've never even fired up ruining Halo? That sounds ridiculous. Well, if you've never fired it up, it's probably pretty safe to say that you're not a part of a community that uses that feature extensively. But I am willing to bet that you've been directly impacted by these communities, and I'm also willing to bet that you probably don't realize how much of a broken mess Halo Infinite's theater mode is. There's a reason why all of the content that you see from in-game is just bland as hell. I mean, you can even see this in the official content trailers for 343. It probably took some poor video intern like 4 frickin' hours to get this single shot. Anything other than like a slow pan or a stationary shot is just a nightmare to capture. But I do have faith that hidden somewhere very deep inside the dumpster fire that is Halo Infinite's theater mode, there's something worth saving. So at the very end of the episode, we're going to talk a little bit about what the next evolution of theater mode could look like. But before any of that, let's talk a little bit about why Halo's theater mode is so important. Fully zoomed out, the reason that Halo's theater mode is so important is that it enables creative community members to make loads of content. And most of this content is interacted with outside of Halo, which then acts as an effective funnel to get more people playing the game. More people playing the game means that you are going to have better matches and more fun, which means you're going to be playing more. Those additional players might be potential content creators, which makes more content in more places that brings more players in. And this process continues in what we call a cycle of growth, which Halo Infinite needs. It effectively expands 343's marketing team to any creative passionate about Halo. And Lord knows, they need it. Now listen, I get it, right? You may have never watched a single machinima video. But here's the thing. That player whose visor you're bouncing your little Spartan balls off of, he might only be in that lobby because he watched a Red vs. Blue episode way back in the day. There are few contemporary games with Halo that offer this sort of creative tool to their communities. So what kind of edge did this tool give to Halo? Let's just think about montages for a second, right? I mean, how many times have you had something absolutely awesome happen in a game and you didn't capture it? With theater mode, creators can go back and grab those awesome moments and share them with the community. Not only that, they have additional creative options, right? Different angles. If you stick somebody from across the map, that's not going to translate well in a POV. It also opens up the opportunity for incredibly creative screenshots. I mean, if you were around back in the Halo 3 days, you know what I'm talking about. I mean, I remember getting sent a screenshot like this from the enemy team after a match, and I wouldn't even be mad. I'd just laugh and then save it so I could share it with my friends later. There was this entire ecosystem of fan-created content on Bungie highlights to engage with. There's even communities that just fly around a campaign map just to look at all of the designs, right? The set pieces, enemy AI. These are things that you can't really get a sense of when you're power blasting Covenant buttholes when you're playing the campaign normally. Now, one thing I also want to highlight is how well theater mode pairs with Forge. There are 2 main ways that this plays out in my mind. There are map and game type showcases, and then there's map refinement. So for me back in Reach, I would watch game type showcases on YouTube of these just wacky games that I would have never played otherwise. And this led to hours and hours of fun with my friends. The second way that theater supports Forge is by permanently capturing how people play. This means you can go back and watch how people are interacting with your map and refine it. Or, I mean, you could always go back and see how much fun you used to have with your friends that haven't been online for 10 years. Ultimately, for the average player, what this translates to is a better action sack gameplay list and also a better community playlist, both of which just means more fun for you. If there's one thing that I know to be true, it's that if you give creative people tools to express themselves, they will create things that you could not even imagine. But in order for that to happen, the tools that you give them have to feel like you're not being punished for trying to use them. So let's talk about the half-baked cluster that is Halo Infinite's theater mode, because honestly, I don't think people realize how bad it is. It's literally like the dude from Saw designed this thing.
Hello. I want to play a game.
For this video, I fired up theater mode for like 15 minutes. And in that short amount of time, this is the list of issues that I ran into. And this isn't even a complete list. Now, if you want, feel free to pause and read through those. But suffice to say that calling this thing rough around the edges isn't sufficient. Now what I want to do is just pick out a few particularly painful points. The bookmark feature doesn't work. So let's say something awesome happens in a match, right? And you don't really want to step into the theater mode torture chamber in order to extract it right now. The problem is that since bookmark doesn't work, you can't really play multiplayer, or else you might overwrite that match with your new matches. You actually only really have two options here. You can stop playing the multiplayer, or you can interact with this broken tool. Another fun little thing is that if you switch off of a character to go into free roam mode, your camera will still be affected by what happens to that player. This little innovation was introduced in Halo 5, and of all the features to make it into Halo Infinite, this one made the cut. And then there are the buttons and controls, and this is just an absolute joke. Most of the D-pad buttons perform two functions. One button doing two things, so if you press left on your D-pad, that's going to rewind the footage as well as move your UI cursor. If you press up and down on the D-pad, that's also going to move your UI cursor, as well as switch between the player that you're observing. Imagine if every time you crouched, you also threw a grenade. If you didn't think this blunder was able to be topped, well, there is no default button for moving the camera up and down in 3D space. For those of you that have never been in theater mode, this is like equivalent to if there was no default button for strafing in the game. It's kind of like an employee was tasked with making theater mode and they got about like 70% of the way done before going off to pursue other career opportunities, and everybody just assumed it was done. They put it in there and did absolutely zero quality control on it. One last thing I want to touch on that personally makes me want to break my Xbox in half is the rewind functionality. Whenever you hit the rewind button, you go 15 seconds into the past, which is already too long. The problem is that it's inconsistent. So sometimes you have to hit it twice in order for it to work. And since this tool was designed by Hannibal Lecter, that means that typically you're 30 seconds into the past instead of 15. It's just a lot, okay? It's just a lot. And let's be honest, I mean, it's probably not going to get better anytime soon. With the entirety of the Halo Infinite landfill burning, it's just not likely that 343 is going to notice this specific dumpster fire. And even if they did, it's probably the last thing on their priority list. But it shouldn't be. And if you'll permit me, I'd like to take a moment to imagine what theater mode could be. Halo 5's Forge was a giant leap forward for that tool. So what would something similar look like for Halo's theater mode? The core mechanic of theater mode is the camera. So right off the bat, Halo needs to catch up with the competition. 343 has been removing features from it, while other companies have been innovating. Things like being able to control basic camera settings, like the field of view, would allow Halo to catch up to its contemporaries. They could do things like automate camera movements in settings. You could get the exact shot that you wanted, just the way that you wanted it, and tweak it along the way. Now, I know what you're thinking, right? Like, 343 has trouble formatting their graphics for their shop, and you expect them to be able to implement this? Impossible. Well, here's the thing. They already have the tech set up for Forge in order to make the intro videos. So they could literally just take that and implement it in theater mode. And another interesting automation idea for the camera would be if you could lock a camera to something in the game. For example, think about the shot that you see when you're spectating somebody who's driving the Warthog. That's just a really cool shot that would be impossible to capture if you were observing in the third person. That would go a really long way in opening up creative possibilities. So when we think about the key functionality of theater mode, its primary purpose is to extract content from the game. So we should probably try and make that as easy as possible, right? Right out of the gate. If we could make it so that we could just have a normal rewind function instead of jumping back 15 seconds at a time, that would go a really long way in making the process less frustrating. To take this idea a little bit further, if you could mark a specific point in the match and then just press one button and skip back to it, that would actually take this bad mechanic and turn it into a great one. So if you're trying to capture an awesome free roam movement, there'd be less frustration and time in between your attempts. On the topic of bookmarks, another way that Halo could catch up to its contemporaries is if it allowed players to actually bookmark moments in the matches as they happen. I mean, they already have a system that breaks down films into cool moments, right? Like double kill, extermination. Those are already little bookmarks that you can go to on the film. If the player had the agency to say, well, hey, I need a shot of a plasma grenade sticking to a warthog, and they could just bookmark that right after they stick a hog in a match. Because, I mean, let's be honest, right? Like, sometimes you're busting out the game fuel and you're putting in a really long gaming session. And since Halo Infinite has like 3 maps and 2 game modes, you're not really going to remember at the end of the night if it was the first or the 30th time that you played Capture the Flag on Behemoth that had that awesome clip in it. And then you could just load that film up and jump right to that spot. Easy peasy. Now, I'm sure there's plenty of other really awesome ideas that could be implemented to push theater mode into like a 2.0 state. But hopefully this kind of gave you some ideas of what could be, right? Instead of just pointing out how much of a moist Lincoln log the thing is right now. So to summarize, Halo's theater mode might be something that your average player never fires up, but most players are directly impacted by the influence that the mode has on the overall Halo community. It gives creative Halo players tools to express themselves, as well as be free laborers for the 343 marketing department. However, its current state is so poor that a creative person like myself feels like it's almost completely unusable. And to be perfectly honest, I mean, the longer this tool is neglected, the harder it's going to be to regrow these communities that were generating content to feed that growth cycle. I honestly hope that someday soon we can see what Theater 2.0 looks like, and these new creatives coming up now can create content that just blows our mind. So how do you feel about theater mode? What frustrates you, and what do you think should be added? Do you actually think that it's necessary for Halo to be successful, or do you think it's already too late? Let me know down in the comments. Let's talk about it. And if you like the content and want to know when more stuff's coming out, you know the drill. Thank you for watching.